Welcome to the Blue Raider Podcast, where we bring you all the latest news, updates, and interviews from the Blue Raiders world of sports. Along with game recaps and analysis, we bring you interviews with coaches, players, and other media members of the MTSU athletic community. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your favorite streaming services so you don't miss our next Tuesday morning upload. Lastly, we want to hear from you, our listeners, on our Twitter account at Blue Raider Pod, or write your submissions to the podcast email at blueraiderpod@gmail.com. Welcome into the Blue Raider Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Bolden, and today is Tuesday, January 23rd. And on today's edition of the Blue Raider Podcast, I'm happy to bring in guest staff writer for Middle Tennessee Athletics, Sam Doughton.
Thanks for having me, Jake. Really excited to be on, and really excited you've started this outlet for more Blue Raider fans to get involved and follow what's going on in our athletic department.
I think it's funny you say that. Whenever I started the podcast, I knew I wanted to bring in a lot of media personalities close to MTSU, and you're relatively new to MTSU athletics. So we've gone through staff writers in the past, and you were one that, as I've spoken through personalities, to say that you are a guy to talk to because of your knowledge base and obviously how close you are with the university. I think it's excellent not only to have you on, we can talk some hoops, and we'll definitely talk some football here in the coming seconds, but as close as you are to the university, having that last episode with Chris Massaro and kind of touching base with a lot of those things with the university, I think, again, your expertise and your knowledge would be insightful. And I know you were able to listen to a couple minutes of that last episode, and I first and foremost, I just kind of want to get your thoughts as far as what's happening at the university and anything you kind of took from Massaro in that episode.
Well, Jake, I was really excited to see that Chris wanted to join you for that. I see Chris every day in the office, but it's not always in an interview setting. Those interview settings, even for me, are few and far between. So anytime he wants to get out there and talk a little bit about some of the stuff he talks about internally with us and some of his vision, I think is really positive. Obviously, he's taken more of a forefront than maybe he has in the past with the coaching change in football. I thought that he had some really interesting thoughts through the coaching search itself, particularly in the press conference where he announced that Rick Stockstill was let go. I thought there was a lot of interesting tidbits to pull out of there, both some personality stuff, but also some broader vision, some broader concerns with the way the football program has gone the past couple years. And I think that they've been addressed pretty well, I think, by some of the things that first with the hire of Derek Mason, and then the way Derek Mason has approached the job, going on first month, a little over the first month now since he's been hired. So we can get into some of that, but as far as your interview with him, I think the thing that I enjoyed him getting out there was sort of that 4 championship minimum number he talks about. One of the things that I love about working for the athletic department is that it's a department that cares a lot about the broad entire athletic department. It's not a department that's only focused on 1 or 2 teams. They really try to make every single team successful, and I think you see that with him wanting 4 conference championships a year across the department at a minimum. I think really speaks to that. Rick Insell, after the women's basketball game on Saturday when they dominated against New Mexico State, talked about how he's blessed to have an administration that cares about women's sports and how that's not something a lot of his peers necessarily have. And I think the success of his program and cross country, women's cross country in particular, softball most recently, speaks to that success. And I think the Olympic sports kind of can get forgotten a lot of times in the shuffle, and there's a good reason for that. Obviously, football and men's basketball are your front porch of everything, of the university, of the athletic department. But there's a lot of success in sports that aren't those two a lot of the times, particularly since I've been here, and it was my 3rd year here, and I think it was good to be reminded of that, and it's something that I have to remind myself because I'm spending most of my time with the football and the 2 basketball programs.
Now, you're not a Murfreesboro native. You're from Winston-Salem. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So it's kind of interesting being like the in-house staff writer, because I think there's obviously being in-house, you have some insider perspective, but I think the fact that I didn't grow up in the area gives me some outsider point of views on a lot of the things going on, just because I didn't, sort of grow up, cheering for the Blue Raiders or really even knowing what was going on day to day. So it's definitely a unique perspective for sure.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because Winston-Salem, for those that aren't great at geography, you're really close you're in proximity anyways, to UNC Chapel Hill. You've got Duke and Durham, and then you're really close to Wake Forest. So when I bring that up, because you have fan bases in those areas who are very close-knit with their universities. And obviously those roots, like North Carolina and Duke, given for basketball, those roots spread much deeper than North Carolina. But one thing that was hit home for me when talking about Massaro was his effort for making MTSU Murfreesboro's home team again. Instead of saying middle loss, MTSU lost this Saturday, to say we lost or we won or we have a big game this coming up weekend. But when you talk about enrollment, MTSU is not necessarily that far off base from UNC Chapel Hill or Duke, who is a private university. So we definitely have a larger enrollment than that. But I ask that because where do you see the disconnect as far as Murfreesboro to its university in relation to those large universities that you're more familiar with in North Carolina?
Well, I went to UNC Chapel Hill for college. Before coming to Middle Tennessee, I actually worked for the Wake Forest athletic department in their athletic communications office. So I'm really familiar with both of those schools. And I think actually Middle Tennessee has a lot of similarities to sort of where Wake Forest fits in the overall like sports ecosystem in North Carolina, because Wake Forest in Winston-Salem is probably like the third most popular school in its city. Because of the alumni base that both UNC and NC State have in Winston-Salem. You have a lot of families that either have a kid going there, their parents went there, had a grandparent that went there, and so they grow up being Tar Heels or Wolfpack fans. And so Wake Forest has to find a way to get them involved in their university, in their athletic department, even if Wake's not necessarily their first choice. And so I think one thing that Middle Tennessee has to do is, obviously a lot of people in the state of Tennessee are Tennessee Vol fans. In our area, you got some that are Vanderbilt Commodore fans, and we've got to find a way to engage with people and make them willing to come out to our events when they're not going to Knoxville, when they're not driving up the road to Nashville, and be okay being a secondary team. And I think that Middle's got the benefit of, we're not competing directly with those two schools, we're not in the same conference as them like Wake Forest is. So you can become a Middle Tennessee fan and keep that sort of primary fan base with the bigger school. And one challenging part of it is that Murfreesboro, as you well know, Jake, has grown exponentially over the past year, and it's grown exponentially with a lot of people like me that don't have a lot of ties to the local area, that maybe have ties to schools across the country where their families are originally from. And so we at MTSU have to find a way to sort of ingratiate them to their new hometown, their new area in the mid-state in Rutherford County, and even into Williamson and Davidson County to some extent, and bring them out here. I think a lot of the ways we can do that is just winning first and foremost. I think is that's not the easiest thing to do, but that is the simplest solution. Is that if you're winning, people tend to want to show up and cheer on a winner. And obviously there needs to be progress made on both of those fronts. But I think you see a lot of it in the fan engagement. There was a DJ at the women's basketball game this past weekend that was received very favorably, sort of an in-house DJ, and sort of those game experience elements are a big part of that. But yeah, just re-engaging with local community leaders, and for me, finding folks like myself that don't have those mid-state ties where they're maybe feel really ingratiated yet, and finding some of those new Murfreesboro residents, Rutherford County residents, and encouraging them to come out, encouraging them to have a good time, because I think our fan experience at the games is pretty good. I think everyone who leaves has a really good time coming to the games, win or lose, but you just got to get them in the door. And we need to find ways to find new people in the county, because there's tens of thousands of new people in the county that maybe don't really know what's in their backyard.
What's so interesting, and we saw it first hand this weekend with Lady Raiders, it's about the crowds that Rick Insell is able to bring in to Murphy Center. And again, the fan experience is definitely one topic that I think MTSU has vastly improved on over the last 2-3 years. But at the end of the day, and you hit the nail on the head there, is winning. And Rick wins, and we talk about the crowds that he pulls just because he brings in a fringe top 25 program, but he dominates his conference. And back to a conversation on, that conference championship expectation within the department, he achieves that every year. So it's not a coincidence that those crowds show up because he's winning ball games. And so as we kind of jump back into the Massaro conversation here and where this all ties together, winning is evident. You've got to do that to get people engaged with your university. And we kind of move this conversation over to football. We've got the Derek Mason hire, and if there was a guy who is not only locally known, whether you're from Murfreesboro or not, you know Derek Mason. He's synonymous with Middle Tennessee because of his ties at Vanderbilt. We're starting to see is he obviously has an outreach with the community. He's doing these Twitter videos where he's talking to fans. He's letting them know he's doing his job. I was able to shake hands with him at a basketball game this last week. He's very friendly. He's willing to sit and just talk to you for just a second, let him know, what's going on. And I think that's great. I'm not expecting Derek Mason to do that forever. At the end of the day, he is a football coach. He's paid to win football games, and he's going through that situation now where he's shaking hands, he's kissing babies. I understand that aspect of it. But Mason was a perfect hire, in my belief, as far as getting fan engagement, because he's going to do that. I just want to hear you kind of tell me a little bit about your thoughts on Derek Mason, the guy, and then Derek Mason, the football coach, as well as his staff that he's had to piece together, because I'd like to also mention, too, on Massaro's behalf, how late the hire happened. I think ideally you'd like that hire to happen a couple weeks before, just for the sake of getting recruiting into place, because this is a guy that didn't have recruits in his back pocket. He spent a whole year away from football, which definitely worries you when it comes to personnel, because you're trying to save as many bodies as you can, and he's not necessarily able to pluck guys out that he's been talking to when he was at Oklahoma State, because those guys are gone. Those guys are recruited. So I know I'm getting a little long-winded with my question here, and I think you're following with me, Sam, but talk about Derek Mason, the coach, who he is as a person, as well as what he's able to do to scrounge around to find the coaches to kind of fill his cupboard, and as well as the efforts he's trying to make on the recruiting trail in such a short amount of time.
Well, I mean, I think you need to start with Derek Mason, the person, and I was fortunate enough to be asked by the university side, university communications shop, to write a story for the February edition of the MTSU alumni magazine on Coach Mason, and for that I sat down with him for about 45 minutes and just sort of talked about who he was. Like, it wasn't so much him as the coach; it was just him as a person. We talked a lot about his early career, coming up and playing at NAU, and what meeting his wife there, and then going into his really early coaching stops. And we're actually going to release that in a podcast form. So it'll be pretty. So we recorded the 45 minutes that we talked as if it was a podcast. So I ended up pulling probably 2 minutes worth of quotes out of it for the story itself. But I learned a lot about him that day. He's somebody that has a chip on his shoulder, that played for an FCS program and really worked his way up the ladder to eventually where he was coaching in the NFL, and then obviously coaching at Stanford, coaching at Vanderbilt, which we didn't get as much into because that's pretty well documented, what he did at those two schools and sort of his journeys there. But he's somebody that's willing to talk about that stuff and is very open about those parts of his past. And I think some of it is that the fan base is definitely more receptive to hearing from him. I think one of the drawbacks of having a coach that's been here 18 years is a lot of the message stays the same, and people who've been around for a long time felt like they knew who Rick Stockstill was. I mean, I can tell you that our metrics on every basic thing that we do with Derek Mason on social media or on stories that we publish on GoBlueRaiders.com, way up. I know that the D&J stories that they've done with Derek Mason are way up compared to their Middle Tennessee football stories. So that suggests to me that there's just sort of an organic interest just because there's some newness there to it. But to Derek's credit, he has really worked hard and been willing to play ball with us on weekly check-in videos, the stuff that he did when he was building the sort of new refueling station, and sort of, converting that space that's a temporary space for some of the nutrition programs into a more welcoming environment than it was when we were sort of transitioning from the SAPC. And, that's paid huge dividends. I think, him going to Stones River Country Club, and meeting with some local leaders and local, prominent members of the community with the mayor of Murfreesboro, Shane McFarland, is going to go a long way in the long term, and just sort of getting his name out there, getting the program's name out there, and encouraging people to be a part of it. And some of those little things can maybe go by the wayside when you've had so much a lack of change for a while. And these are things that you're going to have to do no matter who the guy was. And Derek Mason's had the personality to make the most of them. So that's sort of been my reaction to it as well, is that it's just been really, really positive all around. and I think people are more receptive to it, and he has been able to execute off of it to the extent that it's execution, I guess.
And it sounds like to him as a coach in X's and O's that we are now seeing a clean sheet in regards to his staff. We have, we're not retaining anyone from last year's squad, for good or for worse, however you want to view that as a fan. But I think we're all excited, and we should be excited. And I know you've had the opportunity to sit down with some of these coaches, and I'm just interested to hear kind of what you've learned or you've gathered from these guys. Maybe obviously some in particular that you'd like to discuss, but anything in particular that just stands out to you as you've gone through his new staff.
Well, I think it's a really interesting mix of guys who have a lot of experience and guys who are looking to make the most of this opportunity. You got a guy like Cornelius Williams that was a really good G5 wide receivers coach for a very long time at Troy. It was sort of the stalwart of multiple staffs. Troy's his alma mater. Did a lot of really good things there, particularly under Neil Brown when Neil Brown was there. And he gets a chance to go coach at Auburn on Brian Harson's first staff, and I think there's a little bit more of the story about how that ended. He ended up getting replaced by Harson's former offensive coordinator at Boise State as the wide receivers coach, sort of in Harson's first season. If you want to read between the lines on maybe how that went down, but he sort of had to build himself back up from that point. Spent a year as an analyst at Alabama, then spent last year sort of on a bit of a lame duck staff in New Mexico with a coach that was probably going to be let go if they didn't have a really, really good year last year, which is what ended up happening. So he's somebody that's hungry, and now he's back in the Southeast. He's able to recruit his home state of Alabama, which is what he was known for. It's one of the reasons why he was hired on Harson's staff was his recruiting reputation. So he's somebody that has a lot of experience, but also feels like he has a lot to prove, and that comes across when you talk to him. You have a guy like Bryce Lewis, who's the secondary coach. This is his first position coaching job. And he's somebody that's been in Mason's circle of trust for a long time, played for Mason at Vanderbilt, and then was a GA or analyst for quality control coach at each of Mason's 3 stops from Vanderbilt to Oklahoma State to Auburn. Actually, Auburn to Oklahoma State. You get my drift. Mm-hmm. But so he's learned a lot of football, and he's somebody that Mason clearly trusts to get it done. And so he's somebody that's young and hungry. Somebody like Brian Stewart, this is a chance for him to work with Derek Mason for the first time. He and Coach Mason played together in Northern Arizona and have had very strong careers sort of on different paths from one another. This is the first time they've been on the same staff since they were playing together, but they've kept up with each other and stayed connected. And there's a lot of trust there, and he's somebody that had a lot of success in the XFL and talked about how much he loved coaching there, how much of a fun experience was that for him. But his connection to Mason made him want to come here and prove that he can be that defensive coordinator with that recruiting prowess that he's shown at different stops, particularly at Maryland. From there, he's got a mixture of a guy like Bodie Reeder, the offensive coordinator, is somebody looking to sort of make his mark at the G5 level. Has had some success at the FCS consistently, but has not been able to stick at the G5, and offers sort of that multiple front look that Mason said he wanted in the offense. It's not going to be true pro style all the time, but he wants to bring in tight ends and he wants to be able to run the ball, but he's been in enough spread or air raid systems that he can run a lot of the stuff that the players on the team already know well. So I think that's fit wise, that's tremendous. And he's somebody that's going to be hungry to prove himself and continue to move forward. Just lots of guys that want to improve their station and move up in the coaching world. Calvin Lowry, who's announced on Sunday as the running backs coach. Another guy that was a position coach that, was on a staff that got let go and had, to go be an analyst as alma mater for a year. Now he's coming back being a position coach. And just really, really hungry guys that want to make this work and see a lot of potential in where Middle Tennessee's going, and have the connections here, I think, to make it work. You saw that on the recruiting trail, which was a lot of Mason's work, and a lot of the first few guys Mason's hired did that. But also credit to some of the guys on the old staff that I know played a big role in helping bring some of those guys in. Dustin Royston was one guy who was going to be retained in an off-the-field role, and my understanding is he's gotten a position coaching job somewhere else in college football and would rather stay on the field. So, best wishes to him and best wishes to all the other guys. But I think there's a lot of intriguing potential, but a lot of experience too. One guy I haven't brought up is Kendall Simmons. Obviously, was 8-year guy in the NFL, NFLPA rep, really well respected player, and has sort of had to wait his time and working on Auburn staff across 3 different coaches, just waiting for a chance. And Derek Mason's the first guy to give it to him to be a full-fledged position coach. And I hardly see him in the office because he's out on the road recruiting so much. I think the first time I saw him in the office was 2 or 3 days ago, and that's just how that's just because we were in a dead period until very recently. So something to keep in mind, but yeah, it seems like they're hungry, and it seems like they all have something to prove, which is really what you want in a G5 staff.
Yeah, hungry is a great way to describe it. A lot of these guys are getting second opportunities or their first real opportunities, and you hope that obviously that translates to win. And I think the only thing that would hold them back, because I think we have the knowledge base, I think we have the coaches in place. The only thing that would hold them back at this given time, in my opinion, is going to be personnel. And the one side of the ball that always concerns me is the offensive side of the ball. We've seen a lot of ebb and flow as we move from the Tony Franklin years, and then we've gone through OCs. I think we've gone through 3 over the last 4 years as a program. So there's no continuity. However, we were still able to retain the talent we have on that side of the ball. I think the key is being Vadiato is still, as of the day of this release, is still a part of MTSU's football program. We fully, as me and Austin Lewis had alluded to in a previous episode, we anticipate there being a quarterback battle going into spring practice, although obviously Mason and Reeder would have their comment on that because they know more about their personnel than, say, a podcaster would. But I anticipate something like that taking place. And with Reeder, you talk about his ability to have he's coached multiple sets before. It's an air raid, it's a pro style. I think one thing that I love is that if we're going to try to run the ball, we may actually see a quarterback get under center. I haven't seen that in nearly 2 decades, and that's because of a lot of Tony Franklin football I had to watch. But nonetheless, those are things that gets me excited as a fan. You talk about things that are changing. I think I'd rather see a change and us still be unsuccessful than for us to stay the same and expecting a different result and being in consistent state of insanity. So, and I understand that that's my opinion as a fan, and time will tell, and wins will be translated at some point in time. But I'm glad you put it that way. I think that just hungry seems to be that mantra that rolls through that locker room and through that coaching staff. So I'm certainly excited, and I know it's early, and I know there's still a lot of things to be set until September rolls around, but kind of what is a reasonable expectation? I know myself as a fan, I don't know where I fall, if I'm an optimist or a pessimist in regards to the expectations this coming year. We've already discussed non-conference. We have the Tennessee Tech game. Hopefully that's a win, but you've got kind of swing games with Memphis and Duke, because Duke is going through a change, but 1-3 I think would be an expectation. We haven't seen the conference schedule released quite yet. We're hoping it's in the coming weeks. Sam, what's a reasonable expectation given the staff and where the personnel it is right now in January?
I mean, I think for me, I really have to see what they look like in the spring and sort of what some of those guys coming in that they brought in, because we've lost almost everyone on the 2 deep on the defensive side.
Right.
There are a few impact players coming back. Retaining Devin Curtis, getting him back out of the portal, I think was big for that linebacker room. But he's a guy that struggled to stay on the field due to injury the past couple of years. But when he's in the game, he's one of the smartest players that I've ever seen play football, and can really help that defense get right with a new system that they're going to be putting in. They've brought in some really strong, I think, defensive backfield guys on that defensive side, but they need to find some defensive linemen in the spring recruiting period ahead of the sort of the February signing day, and get some more particularly depth on that defensive line, because they lost a lot of it either to graduation or to the transfer portal during the coaching change. Offensively, you're right. They retain a little bit more of the personnel, most notably Vadiato himself, but also every running back's back. And I think the running game's problem has not necessarily been with the running backs, but more with the blocking.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say probably the better part of the last 2 or 3 seasons. So guys like Frank Pizon, Jaden Krettel, Shaquille Millbrook have a lot of potential in that room, and they've brought in some huge offensive linemen to help them out. But how do they gel? Can those big guys run and move at
Right.
the speed in which you got to play modern collegiate offensive line? And we'll be able to see that in the spring as spring practice gets underway, and particularly in the spring game, which I know everyone's excited to have back. My personal view of the spring game is I think a lot of them are hard to follow because a lot of coaches like to do weird scoring systems because they don't want the ones going against the ones all the time or the twos against the twos or whatever. And so, for me, it's a little trickier to follow sometimes in some of those, set rack plays that maybe you get in a more traditional practice. But I know as an event, it's a big deal, and there's a reason people are excited for it. And so I think getting a chance to sort of see that new look system, maybe get to see some of the new talent brought in. I know Cornelius Williams is very high on the wide receivers they're bringing in, particularly the two transfers, Omari Kelly and Gamarian Carter. He mentioned explicitly when I talked to him for a little Q&A interview. It's just sort of, it's really interesting. One coach I forgot to mention that I think is going to be a sneaky, huge acquisition is Luke Pascal, who's going to be the special teams coordinator. He is a Middle Tennessee alum. He actually played for both Andy McCollum and Rick Stockstill, and was a senior wide receiver on the first bowl team in Middle Tennessee history at the FBS level when they went to the Motor City Bowl in 2006. Has really become one of like the best special teams coordinators in college football that no one knows about because he's sort of done it mostly at the G5 level. Had a few years actually when I was covering UNC, when Larry Fedora was there, where he was a special teams coordinator, and they in some rough seasons had some really good special teams units. And so him getting his hands on what I think's been a pretty solid special teams group during the Stockstill era and getting to put his mark on it, I think could be a sneaky factor. But until we get back to the original question, until we see them on the field, I have trouble predicting what a reasonable standard would be. A bowl game would be ideal, I think, just to get some momentum back at that 6-win mark. That means you'd have to go 5-3 in conference to get that if you go 1-3 in the non-conference schedule. Obviously, a lot of that depends on who the conference teams are that ends up there. If you draw Kennesaw in their first year, that's a game that you feel pretty good about maybe winning home or away. And particularly if Liberty's the team that we drop for that Kennesaw game, then you feel really good about that. But we're gonna have to wait to see. As far as I know, it should be out before the end of the month, is what I've been told. But there's a lot of with these midweek games that Conference USA plays now. There's a lot more moving parts to it than maybe there are for some of the bigger conferences to get those TV schedules set. And I'm sure there's some sort of trade-offs where they want to make sure no team is having too many of those midweek games, particularly for home games. I think everybody, they try to do 2-2 for everybody and make it fair and even for each school. And so figuring out that balance is trickier. That's why maybe it's taking a little longer. But, expect some news on that sooner rather than later, I would say.
It's still hard to say this far out, like I say, in January, because as you already mentioned, like you don't know necessarily who you're going to play, and obviously you'd rather have Kennesaw State over Liberty any day of the week. But we'll transition out of football and talk right now, and I'll kind of leave the choice to you here, Sam. Do you want to talk about the good, or do you want to talk about the bad in basketball?
We'll cover men's basketball first because I do think that the Lady Raiders have a bit more, shall we say, forward focus to talk about, and so we'll look outwardly a bit more talking about them than I think we will talking about how the men have done on the road this week.
Yeah, they certainly struggled, and if you're a listener to this show, at this point I feel really bad. We're only 2 weekends into the conference schedule, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse. And I'll say my 2 bits on it, Sam, and I'd love to hear your insight on what you're seeing because obviously you get to be in those press conferences with Nick and hear his insight. It's not hard to point out turnovers are certainly a problem, and we're just not scoring the basketball. What are you seeing out there?
I mean, I think that's pretty much it, is that, Cam Weston was the one player this team couldn't afford to lose just because he did so much to not only get his own shots. He's a gifted scorer in his own right, but the specific way that he plays basketball opened up opportunities for others, whether it was open shots inside or open shots on the wing that they're just not generating. Some of it is they're not finishing. I think New Mexico State in particular, there was, at least 5 or 6 shots that were either wide open threes or layups at the rim that you really need to make that they're not making. But a lot of it is they're forced to take tough shots because they're not facilitating enough offense because they don't really have a guy that can draw 2 defenders on the drive and kick it or force teams to make tough decisions. Justin Porter's got a little bit of that game in him, but it's more so, can he get past somebody to score himself? He's not the type of player where he's sort of facilitating those sort of transitions. And It's just tough. They are not a very good offensive team, and really any metric. About the only thing they do well is offensive rebound, and when you can't convert those second chances into points, because a lot of times they're not putbacks, they're having to go into a set offense and try to generate something in 20 seconds. Um, it's just tough. It's really hard to win games when you're not scoring the way that they are. And, I think that the toughest thing for me is seeing how close they've been in a lot of these games. I think, you look back on the non conference schedule, games like UAB, Wofford, Western Carolina, games that Cam Weston plays very easily swing the other way. Southern Utah is another one. I think that if Cam's available, probably swings the other way, just given how close the margin was and whether it went to overtime or not. Three of the four Conference USA games they played, the two home games, and then particularly New Mexico State on Saturday night, were close enough late that a player like Cam could have made the difference. And unfortunately, he's hurt and not available, and they've not been able to figure out how to make up for his absence this late into the year. And that's just it's frustrating for everybody. I'm not saying if you're a Blue Raider fan you should give them grace, because they should have figured out something at this point that to help do it better. And they've tried a lot of different things, and just nothing has worked consistently for 40 minutes a night. It's tough because they're defending well enough to be in all these games. And I think they're going to be able to sneak a few games in conference play, just because they're going to defend well enough night to night that, particularly at home, they're going to be a threat to knock off everybody. But they, I think one comment I saw online was, it feels like they're finding ways to lose. That it's a psychological thing at this point, and that can't happen. Basketball is not really finding new ways to lose. They just are not able to sort of put together that final run that they've shown the ability to do at times. They just in the last 5 minutes, it's just not there right now.
Yeah, and you alluded to them being able to have figured it out now at this point with Cam Weston being lost. And I said this when Cam Weston was out, that second game of the year. I thought if there was a time for us to lose our point guard, the second game of the season is the best game to do it. I'd rather that happen than what happened with Josh Jefferson years ago, where he gets hurt going into the Conference USA tournament. So it gives you enough time to figure yourself out in these non-conference games, which in all reality don't really matter. We're not getting an at-large bid even with Cam Weston. But it seems like we still haven't quite figured it out, and we're still tinkering with the offensive lineup still. And we see this last week with the uptick in minutes for Trey Green, a guy that hasn't played over 10 minutes in his career at MTSU, has back-to-back games of 20-plus minutes. He finally gets that offensive side that we've been pleading to see, that we saw back in high school, where he scores 18 points on Saturday at New Mexico State, including 6 of 8 from 3. Prior to that point, he's, 2 of 23 from deep, so he's finally getting his feet underneath him. But the lineup tinkering seems to be, again, favoring the offensive side, but I would argue that you're probably seeing a downturn in the defense that we're of the opponents that we're playing. UTEP is very good at turning the ball over, but they're not necessarily an excellent defensive efficiency team, and New Mexico State definitely is far from that as well. One guy I've been very critical of all season is Jared Coleman-Jones. I'll have to eat my words this week, or actually really the first 2 weekends of the season. Over the weekend, he has double-doubles against UTEP and New Mexico State, and actually, he has 6 assists and 4 assists, respectively, in those 2 games. I still have it highlighted that he has 5 turnovers and 3 turnovers in those games. That's 8 turnovers in 2 games. He's still averaging 4 a game, and I think that's where his season mark is as well. That's still a problem, but I'll back off a little bit because he has it's positive assist-to-turnover ratio, which collectively as a team is not doing well, but those marginal turnover marks make a big difference, like we see in the New Mexico State game. Like if we had an extra possession there late, because Jared turns the ball over with a travel, like that's just one turnover again in a 40-minute game. But those things matter to a team that struggles to score 60 points. You can't afford to just waste possessions like that. So again, I won't beat a dead horse in regards to him, but I think we see where I've spoken in the past about changing this game and selling out for a defense. And I think at this point, we're playing well enough on defense to win these basketball games. We're just not playing well enough on offense. So I'll give McDevitt credit, because prior to this last weekend, we haven't seen much change other than Jacob Johnson and Jalen Jordan being swapped out in the starting lineup. Now we're seeing change in minutes with Ty Mosley, with Trey Green. I would like to think at some point we may see Ozell, because he's a guy who is definitely a pass first point guard. His turnover numbers still aren't great, but again, we're seeing he's trying. And again, listeners are upset because we're not winning these ball games, but I have to give a guy credit because he is making adjustments, and we're just hoping to see that things change. And unfortunately for us, we're losing games in a part of our season where this is arguably the easiest portion of our season right now. We should be somewhere in that 500 mark, and we see so much parity in Conference USA right now where everyone has at least 2 wins and everyone is within a game of being in first place except ourselves. So we're still over here trying to figure ourselves out in Conference USA. Again, they're beating up on each other like we all expected they would, and we're just kind of left out of that party right now. I would anticipate, and Sam, I want to hear your thoughts on this, that we're just going to keep seeing things switch and change around with the lineup. We may see us turn into a more run and gun offense. I again, kind of like what McDevitt did at Asheville when he was in a Big South conference where they played little defense. So I wouldn't, at this point, I'm saying throw the kitchen sink at it. I don't want to be so pessimistic to say that we're going to go 0-16, but if we don't win, the FIU game that's coming up this week, that's another game that is very winnable. But at this point, you just got to try everything and hope something lands.
Well, I remember going to the Murray State game shortly before the New Year. I think I was that game was on December 30th, and that's a game that Middle lost by 20, but at one point led by 10 in the first half, and they were leading by 10 because they went back to sort of that, triangle press style that was very disruptive the last 2 years under McDevitt. It was particularly their bread and butter the year they won the Conference USA East in 21-22. And so I thought that was very encouraging that he was willing to go back to that. But in order to go back to that, you got to have all 10 of your scholarship guys that you expect to play the rest of the year available. And with Jalen Jordan missing some time, the 2 home games, that affected the type of defensive systems they were able to run. They can't press as much because they don't have as deep a bench to sort of run that press system. But Nick likes to because you're going to get tired running those press systems. So you got to batter it down, go more in the half court set. And I think they've been pretty consistent in the half court set outside of allowing straight line drives. Sometimes I think they give up maybe a little too much dribble drive penetration, but their rim protection off of that dribble drive is usually pretty good. They're good at post defense off of that most of the time, and 3-point metrics as far as defending the 3-point shot are much better than they've been under most McDevitt teams. So that suggests that they're spending a lot of time in practice defensively, trying to get themselves in positions to win. And they've been in positions to win. They just haven't been able to find the offensive consistency in that last, 5 to 6 minutes. And maybe that is some tiredness because they are playing guys more minutes than they are used to playing. I mean, it used to be very rare that you would see a Nick McDevitt Middle Tennessee team have a guy over 30 minutes in a game. These past 2 years that I've been here. Now it's very rare if you see less than 4 guys have over 30 minutes a game. Because the bench has shrunk, and with Weston and Josh Ogundelli out, they have less options to go to, and then particularly if Jared Coleman Jones is playing as well as he has been since conference play started, you're not going to use Chris Loof as much as you were maybe towards the end of non-conference play. So it's when the bench gets smaller and when you don't have as many options on the bench for you to use, the amount of buttons you can press as a coach, so to speak, shrink. And particularly when you got a guy like Ozell Jackson, who I think has a really good vision for the game, but needs shooters around him. The team just doesn't have enough shooters right now to make best use of his skill set. So that limits his role. Ty Mosley's a guy that was brought in to be a shooter and really hasn't been a shooter. It was really exciting to see Trey Green be a shooter on Saturday night, 6 for 8 from 3. As you've mentioned many times, that's, what he was known for in high school, is being that type of scorer. And as recently as a month before the season, they anticipated him being that kind of scorer off the bench. He was expected to be the 6th man at one point, particularly after the Italy trip this summer. And, now he's finally maybe about to turn the corner. We'll have to see this week. Jacksonville State comes in on Wednesday and FIU comes in on Saturday. But if we get more of that scoring performance where he's got that confidence now, it's like, oh, I can do it at this level. That's a big boost for this team. I tend to be optimistic, Jake. That's why I, was attracted to this in-house role anyway, where you sort of have to be an optimist the vast majority of the time. So, there's a path for this team, starting this week if they can rattle off 2 wins here and do it in a way where they've built some consistency, I don't think they're so far away that the season's lost. But when you only have 12 more conference games left, there's just not enough of a sample size to wait or have time to figure out. It's got to start now, and it's got to start now the rest of the way. And I think the most frustrating part about this season is you see enough of the ability there that you don't feel like this. You can't throw everything away, but yeah, it's not fun for anybody. It's not fun for those of us in the athletic department. It's certainly not fun for the fans watching. And the defensive style of basketball the team's sort of been forced to play, is it's not. It's only really fun if you're winning a lot with it, I would say, and you can sort of be that thorn in the side to everyone in your conference that you go, God, we got North Texas on the schedule. Oh, we got Virginia on the schedule. This game's going to be grinded out, and hopefully we can be that defensively and make teams sweat the rest of the year. But we've got to get a little more offensive firepower to make them sweat a little bit more and sort of get scared if they go down 5 and know that it's going to be a huge mountain to climb to get back, and they're just not quite there yet. I think they've got the ability to get there, but there's not much time left to do it.
Right, and I hope fans are still you're still tuning in, you're still keeping up, and there's still opportunities to win like this week as you've spoken about. Tomorrow night on the 24th, the Raiders will play Jacksonville State, 6:30 tip, and for those that aren't in Murphy Center, it'll be on ESPN Plus. And then on Saturday the 27th, the men will face FIU at 5 p.m. also on ESPN Plus. And with this upcoming week, we'll just kind of be quick about it before we transition over to the ladies. Yeah, you got Jacksonville State, who has a road win over Liberty, a team that was picked to top of the conference just like us. So, again, that's the parity that we're talking about. Jacksonville State's kind of a bottom-of-the-barrel team as anticipated going into the season. They're a little bit better. At least they have a surprising win over Liberty, who has started out slow, but they're building their way up. They've won 2 in a row. And then FIU, who is very similar to MTSU in the fact that they don't particularly perform well on the road. Their 2 lone conference wins are over New Mexico State and UTEP, who the Raiders just played, both at home. So, again, that's why I say if there's a chance to win, I think these are 2 teams that aren't necessarily top of our conference, but they have some wins that make them a daunting task for a team that, again, has struggled thus far.
Well, and the good thing about that parity, Jake, is that you feel like you can, if Liberty's losing to Jacksonville State at home, Middle should feel like they can go into anyone's gym and get a win. There's no team that you need to oh well, we're going to lose that game. We should write that game off and not really worry about it. At least from our perspective, outside of it, obviously, the team is going to try to win every game, but expectations wise, like you should feel like you should be in every game in Conference USA, and Middle, outside of the UTEP game, which got away from them a little bit early, has been in every game. And so you've got to find, these margins are super thin. And we saw it in the NFL on Saturday with that Green Bay Packers 49ers game. It's sports margins are really thin, and Blue Raiders are just not coming up on the right side of the margin this year, and that's really unfortunate for everybody involved.
Right, and Conference USA is a tough conference, and we've known that for a while, and people think with the moving on of, in regards to basketball, the moving on of FAU and North Texas, that the conference got weak, and you could certainly make that argument because those are big names that have moved on, but when you acquire Liberty, you're getting a good basketball. We're not top 10, I wouldn't say, and we're definitely not a multi-bid league, but we are definitely tops of those mid-major conferences that is going to have tough basketball games on a weekly basis. So, but on the flip side, too, is the Lady Raiders. They have a great 2 weeks. They're 4-0 already. Things are looking really promising, and this week there's a ton of records that were broken, almost so many that's going to take its own segment. But what are you seeing from the ladies that, in my opinion, I think is what was expected? But we certainly are seeing a lot more than just the starting 5 perform well this week.
Well, the thing that makes them so dangerous is that because that starting 5 plays so many minutes together, that any single one of them any given night could be the player that team has to center in on. You can't disregard Jalen Gregory or Tamia Scott, who I think are or Courtney Whitson, who are maybe not seen as like true scorers the way that Savannah Wheeler and Anastasia Boldreva are. But Tamia Scott can rip off 25, 30-point game if you give her time and leave her open. Courtney Whitson can be pretty lethal from 3. Jalen Gregory can certainly be very lethal from 3. But when you have players like Savannah have the week that she had this week, where scoring 30 points against New Mexico State, third Conference USA player ever to pass over 2,000 career points, which is obviously done between Middle Tennessee and Marshall, where she started her career. And then on Saturday, set the record for most free throws made in Conference USA history. When you have her scoring as much as she scored these past 2 weeks, and when you have Boldreva on the block and Yulia Grabowski also on the block that are, double-digit score threats every single time they're out there, if they get enough minutes, they're just really hard to defend. And then defensively, Jalen Gregory and Tamia Scott are such good perimeter defenders, and Boldreva is so tall at 6'6". It's most teams in Conference USA do not have enough options to consistently score. It's just, for the level that Conference USA women's basketball is at, and I would say that men's basketball in Conference USA is significantly stronger on average than women's basketball in Conference USA, which is, in my opinion, a little unfortunate, but it's, to the Lady Raiders' credit and to Middle Tennessee's credit that they put enough resources in to be as dominant as they are. Middle Tennessee is going to take advantage of it, and particularly at home, they're going to be dominant. You're rarely going to see them have a game they have to sweat a lot at home, I think, this year, just because of the strength of that starting. Rick Instel, after the Saturday game, says, I really don't have anything, negative to say about any of my players. And that's pretty much where I'm at right now too, Rick. Like that's there's not much to fault with the way they've played to start Conference USA.
And to complement what you're saying, if you go to the game logs, we have multiple top scorers throughout the season. Obviously, Wheeler has been top scorer before. Boldreva has. She dropped 32 just a week ago. You've got Tamia Scott, who's done it on the road. So you have not only scoring threats, per se, to take the pressure off of Wheeler, but we have players who are capable of dropping 20 points. That speaks to the depth. That speaks to the recruiting. That speaks to how well this team is coached. And obviously, on any given night, if the ball's not going in, Rick is the defense in place to hold teams to 40, 50 points, much like we saw this week with their wins over New Mexico State, where, I was even questioning if New Mexico State was going to get in double digits before halftime. I don't think they broke the double-digit mark until the final media timeout. So they're very capable of not only outscoring you, but they will defend. They'll defend you to death and leave teams kind of with their palms up. So, but with their upcoming slate, they have FIU this Saturday. That tip-off is at 12 p.m. on the 27th, and FIU is a team that has
huge game.
Yeah, and I don't think people have an eye for it, because when you think of FIU last year, very, very bad team, undefeated. And Rick has mentioned this, and I don't know if he mentioned it on the radio. He might have mentioned it to you in the press conference, but New Mexico State picked up a win over Western Kentucky. So that was an eye-opener for the Lady Raiders to not go easy on New Mexico State. And now you're looking at FIU, who's a team that's 4-0. That may be the best-case scenario for us, is the fact that they are 4-0. They are capable of beating us on the road. So I'm in hopes that the Lady Raiders, again, have it together. We've never been known to take teams lightly. I mean, we'll beat New Mexico State by 40 points. And I still think New Mexico State is a top 4 team in this conference. But albeit to Florida International's credit, 4-0 in this conference. They're doing really well, and us being on the road in Miami, long ways from home, you get stuck in that Miami sunshine that we could certainly slip up coming up this Saturday.
I would say that Florida swing, when FAU and FIU were both in the conference, even before FAU was that Final Four team on the men's side last year, well, just felt like, trap games. Even if the teams weren't, doing well, which was particularly true on the women's side, they just always seemed to play well at home, just because that travel was so long to get to South Florida. You've got all the the weather in South Florida that's way different than maybe what you've been experiencing in the winter back in Middle Tennessee, as we've certainly experienced this past week here. But as you said, they have played themselves in the position where they are, depending on, I think Charlie Cram does bracketology for ESPN. He has FIU as the auto bid team from Conference USA. I think that's just because they've played one more conference game than the Lady Raiders have right now, but they've won all of them, just like the Lady Raiders have. So, it's this really big game that, as you said, maybe is a little bit under the radar, just because FIU is not a traditional power, and their net rankings aren't very high because their non-conference schedule wasn't very strong, but has really come in conference play and has taken advantage of maybe, a down year for Liberty and a couple other teams that are expected to be better. and really come out swinging. And the Lady Raiders will have to put together a really strong road performance. And, as strong as they are at home, their road performance is a little bit, a bit more of a roller coaster at times. They needed overtime to beat Louisiana Tech and then came out and smashed Sam Houston. Obviously, La Tech's a lot better team than Sam Houston is, but even still, you'd like to see a little bit more consistency. That's just hard to find on the road sometimes, just because of all the challenges that come in with travel. You're not sleeping in your bed, and all those other things coaches love to talk about that are all true. But really exciting game, and I think it's good for the conference that FIU's having a good year on the women's basketball side, and can sort of be that second threat in the league. I think just as far as narrative concerns, and I'm excited to see him come to the Murphy Center in next month when the schedule rolls back around, and hopefully next week you'll be able to talk a little bit with whoever your guest is about what they did well in Miami this weekend.
Yes, and when you talk about that upcoming slate, things definitely get tougher for them. I mean, they got FIU this coming Saturday, and then next week they'll have the Western Kentucky series kicks off. So you're facing the two contenders at the top of the ladies' side within a 4-game span. So just to reiterate that schedule for you, on Wednesday the 24th, Lady Raiders are at Jacksonville State, 6:30 tip. That game is on ESPN+. And then Saturday at 12 noon at FIU. That's 12 noon Central Time. That's also on ESPN+. Before we wrap up the show, we'll kind of talk a little bit about men's tennis. As we're recording today, we finally got the results in of the men's matchup down in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Big win for the men, 6-1 finish. They pick up that doubles point. Earlier in the week on Friday, they did lose on the road at Oklahoma State 2-4, but still they pick up that doubles point. And Sam, we talked about it before we came on air, how huge that doubles point could potentially be for the men this year.
No question. I think, when with these dual team matches in tennis, that doubles point is so critical, just because it gives you a little bit less pressure on the single side, where if you win that doubles point, you just got to split the rest of the way. Jimmy's got the program to the point where he is playing all of these, really well-resourced Power 5 programs all over the place. This upcoming weekend, I believe they got the ITA kickoff, where I think they're traveling to Durham, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And they're, that tournament is the top 64-ish teams in college tennis every single year. Middle Tennessee's earned that reputation and is going to have a chance to prove it this weekend. And, Duke and State's obviously a team that's knocked them out of the tournament in recent years. Duke's been a team that they've lost to in this tournament before, and is one of the best teams in the country. That's the type of schedule Jimmy plays, and that makes it really exciting to go out and watch, because he gets them to come to Murfreesboro, because the tennis facilities, both at the Adams Tennis Center and now soon to be, on campus. Ribbon cutting for that facility got moved to February 1st. But really exciting to get that win in Arkansas. They're breaking in. They lost that big three of Francisco Roca and Pavel Modal and Stein Slump this year. And so they're having to replace three consistent starters that have been on all those conference championship teams for Jimmy, and have had some good results so far with some of the players that have come in. Leo Ranklin, I think, has been a really good find from Temple in particular. And, really exciting times for them, and they're going to get a chance to continue to grow in the weeks to come.
Yeah, Ray Queen, you talk about top 25 singles player. He lost on his match on Friday at Oklahoma State, but he comes up big with a win over ranked Arkansas Planellas. So, again, you see him finally get a good win under his belt. And then you got guys like Komorowski, Horak. Horak has kind of started the year off slow, dropping both of his singles matches this weekend. But, again, it's the season's young. We'll see this team, again, win a lot of big games, face a lot of big teams. Like you talk about the ITA kickoff that's this coming up weekend. To give you that schedule, on Saturday the 27th, the men will start that tournament off against California, a team that's receiving votes in the top 25, and then they'll play the winner of either Duke or North Carolina State on Sunday the 28th. Just to highlight another guy, Shu Matsuoka, who's been consistently on that fourth court. He's undefeated through the year. He hasn't dropped a singles match, which has been huge for him. He was a guy that kind of kept us in that match with Oklahoma State, picked up the lone singles win for us. They're doing well. Still early, still young, and we'll see a lot of their potential this coming up week there in Durham. But the ladies, they pick up a win against in-state foe Chattanooga 6-1 on Saturday. They pick up the doubles point, and we just kind of have a plethora of singles wins, and they're doing not necessarily the perennial power that the men are, but we're seeing the ladies perform well early.
Yeah, they have a lot of the power teams that have been in the Conference USA on the women's tennis side have moved on to other leagues now because, men's tennis, it's been a journey to find enough teams to stay sponsoring men's tennis in Conference USA. With the addition of Delaware to the conference, they'll have 6 programs when Delaware joins because they have 4 this year. Kennesaw next year is the 5th, and then Delaware would be the 6th the year after that. So, been a journey there, but, Title IX, helps with women's tennis participation, and every Conference USA school sponsors women's tennis. And Middle Tennessee, should be in position where they should be getting a little bit deeper into that tournament now that some of those teams have moved on, and they've built up more depth, I think, in their lineup. I think when you got Elise Swarbrick, who had a lot of success from last year when she's playing at the 5 in singles, you can see that sort of depth having been built up for them. And so I'm intrigued to see how they do the rest of the year. They obviously they don't play quite as challenging a schedule as the men do, not as many team names well known, but they gave Mississippi State a pretty good run for their money, to start the season last week. And I think that was a positive sign of where this team has gone, because I know my first year here, they had a really disappointing year. And then last year had, a bit of a bounce back from that low, went undefeated at home, and have had good results on the road so far that make you feel encouraged about where the direction of that program's going at the moment.
And you feel good about, again, the momentum that they have on home matches, given that the conference tournament's going to be here in Murfreesboro. So, again, just another way for them to kind of capitalize not only on the new facility, but just to kind of capitalize on their recent success. And for their upcoming week, they're going to be on the road once again. You have to play a home match, but they'll be in Louisville, Kentucky this week on Friday the 26th. They're going to play Bellarmine at Louisville. And then on Sunday the 28th, they'll face off against the host school, Louisville Cardinals. Outside of that, on the women's tennis, we have indoor track and field. Their season continues also in Louisville, Kentucky on Saturday the 26th through the 27th at the PNC Lenny Lyles Invitational. That'll be it for the Raider wrap-up in regards to the upcoming week. Sam, it's been great having you on. Obviously a man of much knowledge that I was told about, and certainly does. He's got a lot of insight. And, of course, keep an eye out for his stories. And like you touched on earlier, you are slowly going through one-on-one with each of the assistant coaches, putting out reads on those over at goblueraider.com. So outside of that, what else could we look forward to in regards to your work?
Yeah, I mean, the coaches' interviews are taking up, the vast majority of my bandwidth outside of in-game coverage, for these home games recently. But now that the whole staff's in place, we are anticipating every staffer has been approved, so we should have everybody announced by Wednesday this week. I think by the time that y'all listen to this on Tuesday, we should have the tight ends coach, Joe Gantz, announced. AJ Reesig, who's going to be the linebackers coach, should be announced on Tuesday as well. We the defensive line coach, obviously, it's the last position coach spot to be filled. And once we get all them in, they're going to be recruiting this week. But that period finally wrapped up now that, it's a little bit later into January. So they're going to be hitting the road hard, sort of, fill out the 10-ish scholarships that Mason said they have available. And thankfully, no one, to my knowledge, entered the portal over the holidays, and sort of they've started some of the winter workout stuff with Jamie Blasnick, who's the new strength coach. I'm also going to talk to and talk a little bit about his philosophy of strength and conditioning. So that's some of the stuff I got coming down the pike. I will likely also have features on some basketball things coming as the season goes on. We'll likely be writing something extensively on Savannah Wheeler sometime soon, given all the records that she broke. Trey Green, if he continues to play, will likely come up in my feature list as well. That's something that I really enjoy about my job, is getting a chance to talk to those players and learn their stories and get to tell them to you guys. So that's something I hope to continue to do, even as we're all very excited about all the new coaches, and we'll get a chance to talk to them, and hopefully we'll have more to share soon.
Yeah, and Sam's definitely a great read over at goblueraiders.com. Again, all those stories that he's working through, and he puts in a lot of effort, more so than just your typical game recaps. He puts a lot of effort into getting information out, and I respect Sam's work a lot, so hopefully you'll take the time to go through a lot of his work. What's your social media account you'd like to plug for us?
Best place to find me, as long as the site's still around, is on the website formerly known as twitter.com. I guess you could find it on x.com these days. My handle there is at SJ Doughton. That's DOUGHTON. Usually live tweeting during the games. If stuff comes up in the week, I've been tweeting, reactions to the press releases for all these new coaches that have been getting hired as they come out. I try to get out as much as I can and share as much as I'm permitted to DMs are open on Twitter. So if you ever have any questions or something that you would like me to pursue, particularly, with regards, if you want to learn more about a specific player, please let me know. There's, dozens of stories that I can't get to even in my position. That's why I'm excited that you started this, Jake, because the more people we have with eyes on the program, the more stories we can tell. And, my role as an in-house guy is one small part, or should be one small part of the overall media coverage of the team, and having, more of you guys outside, involved with the program around as often as you are, and I'm excited that you've invited me on and asked me to be a small part of it.
I can't endorse this stuff enough. As long as MTSU keeps you around, I'd love to have you back.
Oh, absolutely, Jake. Just let me know, and I'll be happy to hop on. This was a lot of fun to talk about. Stay tuned for more, because we'll have a lot more to share in the weeks to come.
Great stuff from Sam, as always. And again, upcoming next week, we'll have our 100 Mile of Hate episode, and we'll have on-guest Topper Talk as we go over the upcoming matchups with Western Kentucky on the hoop side. And then in upcoming weeks, we'll have softball and baseball season previews on the podcast as well. Those that want to write into the show, we have our podcast email at blueraiderpod@gmail.com. Of course, we have our open forums of discussion over at gomiddle.com. I appreciate everyone stopping by and listening today for our Tuesday edition with Sam Doughton, and until next time, go Blue.